Hola gente, vamos con el último panel de este cuarto día de nuestra querida South School on Internet Governance, con un tema súper interesante. Hoy empezamos con inteligencia artificial, después seguimos
Okay, we're gonna start with artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. Let's go right now and start with the last session. And we have the privilege to have one of the last panels of today, good friends of ours. The topic of today is artificial intelligence, ethics, responsibility. And I have the honor to introduce friends. We have Claudio Lucena, who's going to be the moderator. We'll hear from Jorge Vega, Iracelay. Claudio, that is in Brazil. Jorge Vega is in Madrid. Jorge, let's welcome everybody. And Nicolas Díaz is in Germany. And he's leaving Duisburg-Essen and he's going to Hamburg. Okay.
Y tenemos a Christine Curtis. She's with us from the United States. Hi, Christine. Nice to virtually meet you. Hope to meet you in person someday. Y la tenemos a Alelí. Ay, me olvidé tu apellido. Alelí Castro.
And Alelí Castro, who's a system engineer and comes from Honduras. So we have a widespread panel across the world. In the 13th edition, we have 500 students. We have simultaneous interpretation also with us in the room. And we have broadcasting, live broadcast to YouTube. Oscar and Adrián says hi, and the team of experts that are here with us today. Claudio, the floor is all yours, and thanks a lot for being here, obviously. Great. Okay. It's a cliche saying that we can hear you because it's mute your microphone. We keep forgetting. It's an honor and privilege. I would like to acknowledge all the students. I would like to acknowledge also the South School on Internet Governance. There are great coincidences in life because this is the first time as moderator and as an official member of Personal Data Protection Office. When I started working in the international community on Internet governance, precisely with the South School on Internet governance in Costa Rica and San Jose, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for being here. The panelists that are going to offer a lot of know-how and their experience. We have Nicolas Díaz Ferreira. He works at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany, so it's a great challenge because it's very late there. Jorge Vega, Iracelay, Christine Custis, head of about ML and fairness, transparent accountability, partnership on AI. Alelí Castro is a system engineer from Honduras, and I'm a member with her in the steering committee. And hug and greetings to Alelí, and probably Haija Atave is going to join us later. That is an assistant researcher of the Five Eyes Foundation. Who wants to start? Nicolas. Okay. Nicolas has a simple and very interesting job. We're speaking of standalone systems and AI. So it's pervasive, and we feel the consequences and the developments across education, in our jobs, in the geopolitics, in trade, public services, public utilities. There are so many spaces where we have total or partial support of standalone options like intelligence or artificial intelligence. That's why we have a very comprehensive vision from different geographies with excellent insights that will make us reflect on the relation with this technology that will serve for the future and the near future because it's already here. Nicolas? Hello, Claudio. First and foremost, can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. First and foremost, thank you very much for having invited me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here of the South School on Internet Governance and to participate in this conference. As you well said, artificial intelligence is interrelated with the personal data protection, with the issue of transparency, governance, ethics, responsibility. This fairness also. They are so interrelated, and this is due to the fact that in a world where there's abundance of data, the Pandora box is open right now. There are so many issues that emerged that at that time when these techniques or statistic methodologies for predictive models with artificial intelligence were developed a long time ago. For example, I studied with the Bible of AI, that is AI, a modern approach by Stuart Russell and Peter Norrie. It was edited in 1994, gathering a compendium of so many publications and methodologies and models of AI that have been developed in the 80s and in the 70s. So for us, we're speaking of techniques and methodologies that were not developed in the year 2000 or 2010, but they trace back to so long ago, a lot of history. So since we have a lot of data and there's abundance of data and we collect them and gather them from different fronts like social media, etc., these models are well fed, and you can predict more accurately. And why do we need these models? For example, for prediction, the prediction of musical tastes or options in the case of Spotify, shopping habits in Amazon, noble purposes like detecting the likelihood of suffering from illnesses or pathologies. There are way many uses and methodologies in AI, but usually it's for making decisions more accurately, what to hear, what to buy, what movie to watch, how to treat a pathology or diseases. These are all decisions that are very complex in nature that include so many factors when it comes to making the right decision. So these systems are very supportive to the decision-making process. When it comes to these applications, eventually they may seem harmless at first because they're creating so much noise. And sometimes we may argue that these AI systems could put at risk our independence when making decisions or lead us to make decisions that are not effective or optimum, that are totally biased, and that may result into discrimination, that not only we persuade people to buy an item of clothing like jeans or buy some service or to vote for a political candidate or make decisions in connection for this system like iCompass in the United States. So it predicted basically whether the person or the offender was going to repeat or commit again a crime, or an offense. So these AI systems that in theory will lead us to make better decisions could also lead us to basically undermine making the right decisions and not taking the most objective decision. So these people, or many people, take decision as the ultimate decision, like as if the system would decide by itself. So we sometimes leave our independence, we set aside our autonomy and reflection. They say, well, the system will decide, and if the system says no, basically I will say no or reject the implementation. So I put him in the shoes of those that develop these AI systems or methodologies, and I believe that when they started working, the architects of this system, on algorithms of AI, knew that or figured that they were going to be taken as granted so bluntly without any additional criteria. That is why we're speaking of including ethical principles of fairness, transparency, and applicability. Because why would you basically implement this or that? Because that will have better interoperability with the people. Now, I believe there's a common denominator of ethical principles that are many initiatives like Trustworthy I for Good, OAI for Good. There are many initiatives conducted on ethical principles or white papers that speak of AI principles. And at the higher level of abstraction, there may be, or there is, a common denominator based on transparency, privacy friendly, and things like that. Now, from the principles until we implement them, there's a long way to go, and we see a whole set of principles, but not so many solutions. So when we discuss the issues rather revolve around AI, I believe that is my perception and that of many, that we are living in a vicious circle and we're moving around criteria that are too abstract. For example, I'm an IT engineer. That's my profession. And I believe that there's a bunch of developers that need practical decisions to include them in the prototypes or in the technical solutions. The problem lies that are many factors by which developers do not include these ethical principles. Many times they are not prepared. If we trace back to my training as IT engineer in the past, there's been a shortcoming or a shortfall on the role that we play as engineers in society. That is not a minor thing, but we're far from reaching those advances. I mean, progress has been made. However, priority should be placed upon the ethical training on IT professionals, on communication professionals as well. And I believe that it is necessary to make them understand that they are the cornerstone when it comes to reaching a trustworthy or an ethical principle AI design, or ethics by defect, privacy by default. So what I'm concerned with in terms of AI is through artificial intelligence, convince, persuade, or provide guidelines and tools to developers so that they can include these ethical principles in their technical solutions, just as we recommend products and services that of Amazon or Spotify. And the idea is the same, how to develop recommendation systems that could guide or provide guidelines to developer in the pipeline of AI, but so that they can reflect on including these principles throughout the pipeline of AI. I think, Nico. Okay, let's continue. I don't know if you remember when we were in July. I think we were in 7DP Latin America when you addressed this issue. And then we were speaking of the ethical training. I was taking the IT course in the 90s, and to tell you the truth, it was difficult to find something in the 90s that considered the life of people that revolve around one ethical option that I would make underline or behind it. I believe that this has become a reality. All the young people are being trained in communication sciences. They have the possibility to impact or affect the lives of many. And ethical training is not included. I mean, we haven't done any updates on that course and on that training. Thanks, Nico. Again, good luck with new challenges that you have ahead of you. Now, these options that are technical options, evidently, they have repercussions in the regulatory framework. And particularly, this is included in a paper tracing back to 2018 with the issues of governance. The Council of Europe had 484 regulatory issues and of governance. And there's one initiative that is very important because it's based on an evidence-based structure or infrastructure with concrete proposals. And Jorge Vega Iracelay has focused on this regulation. He works in the Universidad Carlos III, Spain. Could you tell us about this? Thank you very much.
Gracias, Claudio. Un placer participar nuevamente en esta escuela. Y no podía ser más auspicioso el tema y el título de esta escuela del sur de gobernanza de Internet. Yo creo que después del COVID nunca se evidenció de una manera tan rotunda qué importante es el Internet. Y qué importante ha sido también algunas soluciones de inteligencia artificial que sí pudieron, de alguna manera, ayudar a prevenir y de alguna manera combatir este flagelo de la pandemia. Esto quiero empezar así como para dar un tono, de dar una cara un poco más amigable sobre el tema de la inteligencia artificial. Atrás tengo dos robots, ¿no? Que uno es utópico, un soñador, y el otro es más distópico y no cree que esto llegue a nada, ni siquiera los esfuerzos regulatorios. Nicolás creo que nos dio un buen enfoque sobre el contexto en el que se hacen estos desarrollos, que es esta era del Big Data. Esto es muy importante tenerlo en cuenta, porque cualquier regulación que ignore o que de alguna manera no tenga una buena comprensión de los hechos, del fenómeno, y sobre todo cuando se trata de nuevas tecnologías, seguramente no va a ser una regulación eficaz. ¿Qué está haciendo la Unión Europea? Bueno, la Unión Europea ya desde el año 2018, que comenzó con una gran estrategia para la inteligencia artificial en Europa, de alguna manera motivada también por una preocupación geopolítica, creo. Porque el mercado digital de los datos en Europa estaba siendo monetizado por empresas americanas y se dio cuenta de que tenía que crear un mercado convencido también de que esto traía innovación, progreso científico, tecnológico, y a su vez estimó que había un mercado de datos en en el mundo de alrededor de 825.000 millones de euros hacia el año 2025. Esto es importante porque es la pregunta de qué está en juego. Aquí está en juego, bueno, unos datos que pueden monetizarse de acuerdo a nuevos modelos de negocios, conforme a la analítica, y sin entrar en terreno, creo que Nicolás dio unos buenos ejemplos, tiene que ver con el marketing segmentado, con la publicidad dirigida, alguna más inocente que otra, como puede ser la de las grandes tiendas, Otra quizás más perversa o que está bajo el escrutinio público, como puede ser influir una votación. Todos conocemos lo que fue el escándalo de Cambridge Analytica. Y bajo este contexto, la Unión Europea se traza una hoja de ruta, que lo que interesa a Europa es que generalmente los plazos se cumplen, y empezó con publicar determinados documentos, frutos también de un proceso de discusión más o menos abierta, donde participaron unos expertos de alto nivel. Esto en el año 2020, de alguna manera aterriza en una propuesta de libro blanco, que es de la Comunidad Europea, de la Comisión, perdón, Europea, el órgano ejecutivo de la Unión Europea, que a su vez, de alguna manera aterriza en abril de este año con una propuesta de reglamento general, que es uno de los tipos de regulación que se pueden tener dentro de Europa, para el tema de la inteligencia artificial. Básicamente parte de entender, parte de un concepto de riesgo. Es un enfoque, es un prisma bajo el cual la Unión Europea intenta regular algunos de esos desafíos o de riesgos que nos presentaba o que nos presenta la inteligencia artificial bajo la opinión de la Comisión y a su vez el asesoramiento que le dio este grupo de altos expertos que fueron nombrados allá por el año 2018. Ya en el año 2019, este grupo de expertos dicta unas directrices de una inteligencia artificial ética, y ahí viene un poquito también el nombre, creo que del panel, irresponsable. O sea, dice, sí, apostamos por una inteligencia artificial, pero esta tiene que ser ética y tiene que ser responsable. Sobre el tema ético, ya nos habló algo Nicolás. Yo estoy un poquito tentado de entrar en terreno, pero no me voy a meter. La ética tiene, sí, voy a hacer solo un comentario, que tiene un problema, que todos definimos la ética de una manera distinta. La ética, salvo que tenga un código de conducta y un procedimiento claro y un tribunal, y se dé por los propios miembros de una comunidad científica o profesional, pues es muy raro que al final sea eficaz. Y por otra parte, lo digo como alguien que ha trabajado mucho defendiendo los intereses de la industria, pues la industria hasta ahora vivió con esta panacea de que todo el tema de la inteligencia artificial estaba desregulada. Y lo primero que propuso es, pues vamos a adoptar un código de ética. El tiempo pasa y vemos que la regulación, por distintas razones, entre ellas el lobby de las grandes empresas tecnológicas, pues no puede ponerse de acuerdo sobre los detalles de lo que significa qué es ético y qué es responsable. Aterrizando sobre esta propuesta de regulación del mes de abril, pues repito, el criterio de fondo, el prisma sobre el que se ve este tema de los riesgos, es el de entender quiénes son los sujetos en la cadena de suministro de un sistema o de un producto desarrollado en inteligencia artificial que están en mejor condición de manejar ese riesgo. Y determina que hay determinados desarrollos que están prohibidos, otros que tienen un riesgo alto, otros que tienen un riesgo medio o bajo y otros que no tienen ningún riesgo. Como ejemplo, los prohibidos puede ser, por ejemplo, el tema del scoring social. Ahora, y es una de las críticas.
Now, one of the criticisms refers to the government, not to private corporations. One of the main problems are the social networks, defining clusters and groups of interest that they give us content or material in this social media. This has to do with specific sectors, for example, or the high risk, and it requires a consent before launching a product. And this regulation is not included in civil responsibility from the legal point of view. And as a recommendation in 2017 and an opinion that was adopted in 2020 in Parliament, this demonstrates that there is consensus on the principles that were far from having a regulation, detailed
Los de riesgo
regulation.
bajo, de alguna manera,
And low
la
risk
capacidad de
gave us the possibility
etiquetado, esa conformidad,
of having that label
los de riesgo
or voluntary
nulo,
consent and the nil risk or inexistent risk
las principales
of the
críticas que se
regulation.
hace a esta propuesta, que a su vez tiene que pasar todo un proceso hasta que sea adoptada por el Consejo
So,
y por el Parlamento, es que no es
until
una
this
reforma
adopted
sobre la responsabilidad civil,
by Parliament,
no es una legislación que
it's not a
armoniza
legislation that
otras
harmonizes
disposiciones que son obligatorias, como
other
el Reglamento General de Protección de Datos.
provisions like
Yo
the
creo que,
personal
bueno,
data
si
protection
bien es un gran
system.
avance,
And even though it's an advance in building
pues
a
todavía hay
regulation
mucho
with
que hacer.
artificial intelligence,
¿Cuáles
there's
son las
much to
críticas?
do.
Y con esto termino, no quiero robar
What
más
are
tiempo
their
a
criticism?
colegas del panel.
And let
Es
me
que hay que cambiar un poco la mentalidad.
see if I can give the floor to other colleagues
Yo tengo una
in the
formación como
panel that
abogado,
we
pero
need to
trabajo
change the
en una
mindset.
compañía.
I
No hay
worked
mejor
in
fórmula que
legal
trabajar
training, but I work with
con
engineers. There's
profesionales.
no better formula to
Entonces, si
work
nosotros
with
vamos a
engineer
extrapolar
and
un
with a
concepto
lawyer
jurídico,
to
como puede ser el de la
create a
causalidad, que es un
patent.
principio básico de
If
la
you work
responsabilidad civil,
with a
para
legal
entender
system
cómo
that
un
is
algoritmo
with a
hace
civil
correlaciones,
principle
vamos
to
por el
see
mismo
how
camino.
we see the
Entonces,
correlation
la
of
letra de la
algorithms,
ley puede
that's
ser
the wrong
muy
way to
clara
go
al
about it.
principio,
I mean, the law
pero
could
lo
be
peor que
clear
puede pasar
at
a una ley es
first,
que no se cumpla,
but the worst
que
thing
sea
that could happen
ineficaz
is that it
y que al
is not
final
complied
no
with.
defienda de manera efectiva
And
los derechos que quiere
it doesn't
proteger a los
advocate or
jurídicos.
protect the rights
Entonces,
and the
cuando
underlying
pedimos, y con
values.
esto termino,
So when
el
we
Reglamento General de
demand
Protección de Datos,
the
artículo
Article
22
number 22 of data
el
protection
responsable de la
and other
protección, el
articles,
encargado deba
who
explicar
is the one
el
responsible for
la lógica
preparing this, that
de la
has to
decisión
explain the
acordada,
rationale of
estamos en un
the
camino
decision.
muy difícil. Porque
This
un
is
ciudadano
a
común es muy difícil
difficult
que entienda, y sobre todo porque si entendemos
pathway
cómo funciona la
or a
inteligencia
difficult
artificial,
path,
que va a llevar también
and it's
tiempo
difficult for
desarrollar
the citizen to
los
understand it
conocimientos,
because it's
pues
going
no
to take
todas,
some time
no
to
todas las
work
decisiones,
around
no todos los
AI,
resultados,
not
no
all the
todas las
decision, not all the
inferencias, las
results, and not all the
aproximaciones
inferences
matemáticas
made by
van a poder
mathematical
justificarse por
correlations
los humanos.
are going to be
Con lo
explained
cual, el
with
principio de
human
aplicabilidad
resources. So
al
the
final cae en
problem
libertad.
of
Yo creo que
applicability
creo que puede tener una regulación que
basically
sea
is
ineficaz,
deadlock.
que al final no sirva a los propósitos
So
para los
we
cuales
have
fue creado, y
ineffective
en definitiva va
regulations
contra la
that doesn't serve
confianza
the
que queremos
purpose
crear
and
los
goes
ciudadanos
against the
comunes
trust
en
that
esta
we need
nueva
to create on
tecnología
the
que
citizens
tanto
with this new
bien puede
technology
hacer para la humanidad.
that
Termino con algo
can do
positivo.
so much good for humanity.
Hoy
And
leí
on
que un
on
sistema
a
de
positive
inteligencia
note, I
artificial
learned that
había
an AI
podido
system
reconstruir la
could
composición
rebuild
de la 10ª sinfonía
the
de Beethoven.
composition
No
of
es
the
maravilloso.
10th
De
Symphony,
acuerdo a los
the
patrones de
10th
composición
Symphony.
de Beethoven, se entrenó al
In
sistema
line
para
with
que
the
pudiera actuar.
patterns,
Se estrena pasado mañana. Los dejo
he
ahí.
trained the
Espero que los
system
movimientos de mi
to
sinfonía
compose it,
tengan una buena necesidad.
and probably the movements of the symphony could be effective.
Muchísimas gracias, Jorge. Nosotros tenemos hoy en el
Thank you very much.
de la propuesta de regulación de la Unión
We have the
Europea sobre
proposal of the European Union
el framework más avanzado que tenemos
that could
hoy
be
en
the
el
most advanced framework that we have.
Está basada en torno de la noción de riesgo, ¿no?
And is based on the
pero se usa la
risk.
expresión high risk use
We use
de AI.
the high risk uses of AI.
Utilizaciones,
I believe that these are the 10 uses of high risk. And I believe that this one is the European methodology. In August, we had a Chinese initiative with the regulation of internet AI, but not based on risk, because the European approach is to select what are the uses of AI that create the most important potential risk to a large proportion of people, and then to use the rationale. However, in China, they have a different proposal. What surprised me of China is to regulate recommendation systems. That is to start with artificial intelligence, and that is important, and these are comparative analysis in this regard that would serve as an effective
Christine,
methodology.
thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being with us and for joining us at the South School on Internet Governance. it seems like there are key words for us to work with. I don't know if transparency is still one of those strong notes. It used to be one very strong notion when we started bringing the artificial intelligence key to the table. We then started to think about words that try to let's say to control more and to exercise a little bit more of oversight. And then we talk a little bit more. We have been talking a little bit more about the ethical discussion that has come to the table. And we also have brought onto the table fairness, accountability, and governance. I think that's exactly your position at the Partnership on AI. And I would like you to invite you. You have the floor. Thank you very much for your presence.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I can't wait to go back and review with the captions on so that I can follow all the wonderful conversation. Yes, my name is Christine Custis. I'm with the Partnership on AI here in the United States. And I'll tell you just a little bit about us and about the work that we're focused on. We are a nonprofit partnership of many different organizations, academic, civil society, industry, media organizations, and tech companies. And we're all convening together to make sure that we make decisions that advance AI with positive outcomes. And so the work that we do in the particular area, the folks that I serve, we do think about fairness, transparency, and accountability. And one of our main projects is called About ML. And it's basically a project where we look at how we can use documentation as a way to operationalize responsible AI. So this is how we take a tactical approach to fairness and transparency through documentation. So I just want to walk you through just a couple of things, and I'm happy to share these slides with anyone who is interested. The first slide here that you're seeing on your screen, I hope that you're seeing it on your screen, is just a high-level machine learning lifecycle. You've probably heard of the software development lifecycle. Well, there's also a machine learning lifecycle, and there are these different phases where we are developing and thinking about and planning and designing and then deploying, observing, maintaining, all these different phases that we go through in order to develop and then deploy systems. And what I want to talk to you about is all the different opportunities throughout these phases where we can action responsible AI. So let's take a look at the next slide. I want to talk to you about all the different phases that have to do with the data. So we're still talking about the machine learning lifecycle here. When we're thinking about the machine learning lifecycle that as it relates to data, in the very beginning, we need to specify what type of data we need. Where are we going to get it from? Who owns it? Tell us more about this data set. What is the trajectory of this data set? Who keeps it fresh? So these are things that as we're developing our machine learning systems and we're thinking about where the data comes from, these are prime opportunities for documentation. Keeping a record for your future self or other folks who might come along later and want to understand how you specified your data and why your specification is important for your specific business use case. We want to connect the technology and the reason we're building it using algorithms and models to the actual business need. Another phase in the life cycle that is meaningful in thinking about how we can action responsible AI is the data curation. So you figured out the type of data you want. Okay, where are you going to get it from? How are you going to process it? What is the composition? Are there special judgment calls and rules based on your geography, based on the laws where you are from, based on what industry you're in, whether there are privacy rules that you need to adhere to? So we want to keep a record or keep some documentation around the rules that we make up about our data. I'll pause there. Did somebody have a question? I thought I heard something. We okay? All right, I'll keep going. Yell at me if you have a question. So this is another opportunity, another prime opportunity for documentation. operationalizing responsible AI. We don't want to just have principles, high-level thoughts and ideas. We want to be able to take action and operationalize transparency and accountability. And this is a way we can be accountable with the way we document how we have curated our data. Just like a scientific experiment, we want people to be able to duplicate what we have done. Still talking about the data, there's integration. It's very unlikely that you will create a machine learning model that just has one data source. You're going to be pulling data from lots of different places. You want to keep documentation on where you're getting it from, how you integrate it, what are some of the complexities of those integration points? Maybe it has some sort of reaction when you mix this data with other data. So you want to understand that entire pipeline of information. You want to have rules of engagement for your data management. And you want to make sure you separate the technical aspects of your data from the scientific and data science aspects. Just because you have different roles and responsibilities throughout the life cycle, and the people playing those different roles want to know different information about your integrated data. And then we know that data does not stay fresh forever. You need to think about where that data came from. If it belongs to people, did they give you consent? How long does that consent last? Whose job is it to keep that data fresh and to make sure the laws haven't changed and you can still use that data? We have in the United States, a few years ago, it became against the law to put social security numbers on credit card applications. And so this is something that throughout all the different data stores that are used in different models and algorithms in models, we have to go back and make sure we are in compliance with any new regulations that happen with our data throughout the life of its use. So again, we're just talking about the different phases of the life cycle and all these opportunities where we can operationalize responsible AI using documentation. Let's keep talking. We'll look at the next slide and we'll talk about the model. So this next slide talks about the model and all the other opportunities we have to keep documentation. Again, we are specifying what model we are using. How are we architecting it? You know, what are our regularization rules? What types of things do we know about our hyperparameters? What do our optimization algorithms look like? These are all things that sort of live in the head of the machine learning engineer, but we got to write it down. We got to make it accessible and democratic for other folks so that it's clear the choices that we made and why we made them in case we need to go back and find errors. We can't always be proactive enough to keep errors from occurring, but we want to have strong documentation so that we can go back and find those errors and correct them. We also have opportunities for documentation in our training of the model. We need to let people know how we trained, how we debugged. Again, we want to do this scientifically so that people can duplicate. And if they can't duplicate, we understand that there are some areas that need further explanation. We want explainable machine learning. We don't want a black box that can't be explained. So we want to be able to document the type of model we used. We want to be able to document any consequences that are relevant to any downstream data stores. And this is something that we can do during the training of our model. During the evaluation of our model, we want to keep track of how we're using this model and how we're measuring performance. What are our measures? What are our metrics? What are the properties of those key performance indicators? We want to make that super clear, and we want to tie it back to the business case so that we can tell people why we say this is a model with 90% accuracy. How are we evaluating? We want to make sure it's very clear so that it can be duplicated. We want to make sure that the metrics we choose are applicable in case the business case changes. What I mean by that is you have a model that performs a certain function. It may be reused in another business case, but we need to make it clear in our documentation if our metrics will not allow that reuse. We also have opportunity for documentation through our model integration. Again, when we're solving complex problems with machine learning, Very rarely will we use a single model. We need to know the consequences of mixing and matching and merging models that also have mixed and matched and merged data. So we want to document all of this thing. What are the rules for validation for this one? What are the rules for training for that one? So we want to make sure we have a record in our broader conglomeration of systems, of models, so that we can keep track and make that clear throughout the life cycle of this machine learning effort. And again, models don't live forever. They are sometimes deprecated. They are sometimes revised. We need to have some sort of version control so that anyone using our algorithms, anyone using our models, anyone using our data understands when it has been updated, when it needs to be refreshed, when it could possibly break something else in the pipeline. So these are just all opportunities for us to do some very simple record keeping, some very simple documentation to make it clear and meaningful and democratic and accessible for others to continue our work. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions, and I'm happy to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Christine. We've been talking over the past years a lot about the issues and the pitfalls and what the things that could go wrong when we use automation techniques in general and artificial intelligence techniques more particularly. And when we embed them into the human activities, and it's happening everywhere. But I think it's about time we start talking also about something more concrete frameworks that tell us, or at least that lead us in directions that we think should be the ones, so we can keep record and keep oversight and correct eventual mistakes that we're making. And we're extremely happy that you have brought one of these proposals, starting from which now, after you've mentioned it and after you established it, seems very simple thing to do, which is organize, document, keep records. By the way, that's how we improve any model that we decide to put into practice anywhere. But the fact that you have organized that, it seems very interesting to me. I'm sure there are going to be questions in the coming minutes. I'm already curious about if the team is looking at that framework as a sector-specific thing, or if you're meaning it as a more broad initiative. If you're thinking about different sectors, how you imagine it should behave in different sectors. But I'll hold my curiosity and leave us a little bit of time after we move to Alelí. Thank you once again very much for your time and for your insights, Christine. We're coming back to that. Thank you. Alelí Castro, mi compañera hondureña de la Universidad Tecnológica de Honduras, de UTH. Yo he estado un par de veces en UTH, siempre en San Pedro Sula, en otras oportunidades también.
I've been in Honduras and I've been working in UTH. Now, the question that I have, and probably you can take this question, is once we look at the development technologies and all the legal aspects that are pressing at this moment, and once that we have listened to Christine, where we have human oversight and supervision, what is the direction that we are heading towards? Well, what is the direction that we need to take with this scenario? Good afternoon or good evening, depending on the timing zone you are. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to participate and to share my experience. I would like to share my presentation now. I would like to use this space to reflect upon artificial intelligence, and along my presentation you will see some of the aspects. I've never met Christine, Jorge, or Nicolas, and my presentation interrelates with your topics and with you. Despite being in different countries, we have the same feeling. That's why I need to work with this presentation, reflecting upon the future of artificial intelligence, preparing ourselves for the future. And this is here to stay, being developed with our opportunities and proposals. We have to see what we can do about this. Nicolas said that he's a system engineer. Christine has some other profession. Jorge comes from another background. But we all seem to be interested in AI, so I urge students to reflect upon artificial intelligence. That's why I titled my presentation that is called Trends That Define the Future. Artificial intelligence, trends that define the future. We should speak of disruptive technologies when addressing AI. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, disruption has revolutionized all concepts. So we have AI, and we are going to give an overview without losing sight that augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, big data, and robotics are in a way related to different processes that work together with artificial intelligence. Just like Jorge, I did my homework and I've been doing a lot of research, and I take pride in seeing your presentations and underlying the underlying concepts. We have seen many proposals and many declarations, and we have identified these countries that are amidst this development. Some of the projects are operative, and some of them are in the trial phase, and some of them are in the testing phase. So my reflection is like follows. How much are prepared to see the actions that are, or how difficult is to make decisions based on this intelligent algorithm? Is it possible to make decisions responding to this kind of behavior or actions? We can assign processes that will depending on a smart algorithm, whether it is AI, applied to robotics, processes, law, because right now law is highly involved in artificial intelligence. Now, tracing a parallel, let's see how organizations can exercise the control. Like, for example, the United Nations. To what extent these organizations are aware of the changes that are going to create with this evolution as AI makes progress. And that is why I would like to share with you these ideas. There are many countries that have been working strongly in this endeavor. The United States and China are competing with the development and the application of AI in different processes to take companies to a higher level of competition. We have this process in Spain, but in line with this investigation that we have developed in Spain, we are protecting, or they are concerned with the protection of human rights, of users, personal data. Precisely this year, they have decided to invest a lot of money in AI because they are not against technology as such, but they are in favor of protecting what is being created out of this technology. So what in the white paper on AI was published by the European Commission in 2020 is the ethical responsibility, because it's strongly linked to processes that lead to the application of this technology, to the success in the solutions that are being created with this application. On the one hand, we have higher investment on AI, especially in Spain. We have funds allocated to different projects. So what is the challenge ahead of us? To prevent autonomous decisions like explicability, responsibility, transparency, and biases, and discrimination and privacy. But it's not that they are not willing to invest, but that they're taking care of this, like privacy, data privacy, and as Jorge said, it's an open market, so the database is open and is sold to the highest bidder. So how can we filter, control, protect, or safeguard these sort of situations? At the end, I have a proposal. We have to retain and promote researchers and experts in the sector, because if there are scientists that manage AI research, however, in their places, they do not have the funds to invest or to create projects, what they do is to migrate. The idea is that to keep the talents in the country, what are the guidelines and the applications of high risk? Well, that would be the health sector, transportation sector. Imagine these people being cared or being looked after with people that have no talent in the health sector, the legal aspect, administration, also facial recognition, for example, is of high risk in their opinion. So they had to see how they monitor that. Skills should be promoted, and also they created an excellence European center, just like China and the United States, because those are superpowers, and we're going to see how they segmented AI across the world. Here I would like to briefly say that in the United States, they have declared that the AI algorithms cannot patent its own inventions. The only ones that can patent inventions are human beings, and this was published October 2021, because a scientist through AI basically achieved 2 projects that were developed by this technology. So they didn't allow to patent these projects given the situation that it was not that he did that, but it was AI that tried to patent the invention. So how an analytics and AI could help save lives and reduce crime in the cities? Well, I'm referring to many cities. For example, in Bogota, they opened an office of analytics that manages through AI, and it controls and monitors and provides follow-up to possible behavior of criminals in order to prevent cases of crime and abuse, because there's a lot of cyber crime. So they have opted to choose or to resort to AI in data analytics. The objective was to combat or to fight corruption and insecurity. Here I'm showing a graph.
Mi cámara me está jugando una mala pasada. Lo siento.
I'm sorry. But we see the PowerPoint. Here we are showing how Latin America makes a contribution and how they are investing in artificial intelligence with its regulation and its application. In order to control the advantages, I would like to end by means of a proposal. Here we see that Uruguay, Chile, Colombia, and Argentina are leading in Latin America the issue of development and regulation in terms of AI. Now, here we have the map of strategies of AI. The United States and China clearly know what they want to do with these proposals. They have their strategies well defined. One could observe who are creating these proposals in yellow, and in orange, who has strategies in place to develop AI. And the rest of them are merely spectators. So I urge students that are from countries that are not covered by this map to make the necessary contribution to this development. This was published April 27th this year. This dates back to the information that you share, and that information is very current, updated, and very important for the conference that we're hosting right now. Now, before I conclude, let me leave you with these questions. Would you receive fair treatment if your boss were a robot? We are getting to that level. If it were a robot, would it be concerned about the perception or feelings? Artificial intelligence is very, very cold because it doesn't understand feelings. It understands only patterns, data, and directions. So this is what I'm going to ask you. Also, I would like to know its application, because there are many platforms nowadays that as a result of the pandemic, they became strong, and you upload the profile and they ask you about your experience, and at the end of the day, probably you are rejected and you may meet the criteria, but however, if you don't fill out one item, you don't qualify. That's simple. So the question is it fair that a computer accepts or rejects, for example, a job application? We should all be prepared. So AI is here to stay, and all technologies are related to that. But the only thing that is left to do, there's something that we can do is to promote training from the academic sector. If we have the chance to reach others, we need to promote training of artificial intelligence to improve it overall. And let me comment what happened Monday with Instagram and the social media that was down. We got scared because we couldn't communicate, and it was like doomsday. Why don't you watch this documentary? Here, the experts of Silicon Valley in Twitter, in Instagram, and the social media exposes the reality of this social media. There's data that we are not aware of. The level, for example, of suicide, the rate of suicide is alarming. It starts in the United States. It's an alarming rate because social media basically have an acceptance of everything that we post, and there are many people that take it seriously, that nobody posts and nobody retweets, or sometimes they have to focus on a more aggressive video or a more beautiful picture, because that uses algorithms that affecting people indeed. And I can assure you, the smartphones can listen to us, that we may be talking about a film and then you have movie options. So It is necessary to document this, to educate ourselves in connection with social media and artificial intelligence. And let me conclude by AI in cybersecurity is taking a strong hold because cybercrime, cyber harassment, they have evolved, and this goes hand in hand with artificial intelligence in order to mitigate the risks and to identify where and when it's happening, but we also depend on the government, that the governments should react. And hopefully I'm wrong, but they are not concerned with the involvement of AI because everything that leads to control and transparency. And artificial intelligence right now is working with cloud security, with network security, and with identity management access. So basically, this is what I would like to share, and my reflection is to provide training and educate ourselves. And if we have a chance to be professors at the university or with others, we should focus on education and replicate the know-how on the use of this sort of technology. Thank you.
Thank you. I imagine that this message that you left is very important. If we have 500 fellows, I'm one of them actually. It is a very different profile with people from all over the world and from different areas of expertise. So AI is going to be in the next few years a very broad space for opportunities for all of you, and we need to take into account education, training, learning, and getting to know all these things. And Alelí was saying, or was giving an example of filling in a form and not having access to present it. And here I have, I'm sharing in the chat with you the link of a company that is called Highview. In this company, not only you needed to fill in a form, but also a video was sent. And the Highview was is a software, an app, a platform that promises to find and to extract in your video, the video that you are sending. You didn't fill in anything, any kind of information. You didn't write anything. You simply sent a video. And this platform promises you to extract from that video the personal characteristics or features that the employer requested. Is it trustworthy? Is it going to work well in a team? So this is a corporate platform. So how are we going to be certain that this is a technology that can help us? And here we need to think about, is this a safe technology? Can it be trusted in order to reject, for example, a candidate? We need to discuss this. I'm sorry, Aita couldn't be here. He has an emergency and couldn't be here with us, so we have a little bit more time. And I know that the fellows have a lot of questions, so I'm going to start with this reflection now. I'm going to reflect on something, and then I'm going to give the floor to Christine. Mr. Pedro Domingos, who is a well-known scientist, specialized in IT. He's from Portugal, but living in the US. And he's saying that nowadays, all the dilemma that have been posed by the philosophers are, all the philosophical dilemma are being tested nowadays. And I'm also going to reflect on something that another philosopher said, an Italian philosopher. Professor Luciano Floridi, and he said, he talked about a simple solution, a simple problem and a simple solution, but it's actually brilliant. What he said was, we are under no conditions of knowing if we are going in the right direction, if we don't know where we want to go to. So this is very simple. And he's saying that we need to know which is the digital environment that we want to have in the next decade. That is an important question. To know if we are in the right direction, we need to know which is our digital environment project. And in that sense, I'm going to ask a few questions. I want to ask Christine.
I was telling our fellows that Professor Pedro Domingos, a Portuguese computing scientist who currently lives in Washington, he frequently puts us that all human dilemmas, all the dilemmas of the mind of the last century, are currently tested through machine learning models. And I'm adding to that the fact that another philosopher, who was Professor Luciano Floridi, who headed the Oxford Internet Institute for a number of years, is also all alerting us to the fact that we do not know, and we will not know if we're going the right way if we do not have a project, if we don't have a plan, if we do not know where we want to be. So and where we want to be in terms of digital space. The question for him, and that's why we need philosophers. The question is, what digital environment do we want in the coming years? That is the fundamental question, because if we all put what we're discussing here together, we have to understand the direction we're going, and to that reason, we need a direction. So I would like to start with you, and if you want to highlight any other thing from your presentation, you could. Very welcome to do it now. But those would be my starting points for you. When you and the partnership on AI and the various other players who are working on similar frameworks throughout the world, do you pose yourself that question? What digital space do we want for the future, so we can evaluate, assess the frameworks that we propose for them?
Yes, I think that's a really great question. And it's the one we should begin with, not what fancy product can we build, not what cool app can we get in the app store, but how will this affect people and society? And how will this, because great technology often pervades our lives. Can you imagine going 2 weeks without your phone? No, you couldn't, because it's now so much a part of the way we live. And so we should think about how this will affect our living, how this will impact our lived experience, and how there are different lived experiences. And that's where the thinking about bias could come in, that we see that people are impacted differently. And so we want to think about how we can be equitable with the way we develop and deploy, and just putting all that down. And what we preach is putting it all down in documentation so that we can be honest about ourselves, that we thought about not just the good scenarios, but the bad ones, the possibility for risk and negative impact. So I think it's a great place to begin, and not the fancy tech part.
That's a great starting point. Thanks again, Christine. Nico, si tienes otro aspecto de tu presentación, o tema que
Nico, I don't know if you have another aspect that you would like to mention. I wanted to mention something. Can you tell me, in the training for the next developers, can you tell me the different questions that we can pose them and how we can tell them that these ethical concerns are part of their everyday life?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. Let me pick up what Christine shared with us. In connection with this life cycle of development, the pipeline of AI, and the different opportunities that this framework can provide us to document the many decisions, design decisions, that are made during the life of an AI project. I totally agree that we need to document key decisions that create a large impact on the final result of this process. The issue is that coming from the IT world in software engineering and understanding how traditional software, because AI is based on software, how difficult could it be on average to document the diagram of classes? Unfortunately, developers in agile development environments, we have agile methodologies because of a principle of the agile methodologies that we have, and does not place priority upon documentation, unfortunately. So we are playing around or fighting an organizational culture where these details are details that when we see them afar, but they have a strong impact. For example, we have to document, and at the same time we need to train or provide support to the developers along the cycle of that development to convince them that documenting is really worthwhile, and the decisions that you're making in a report, or not, let's not put it in a report because they don't write in a reports or reporting on the decisions they make. But we shouldn't be documenting the activity, for example. What we're really doing research on, and the research that I do are the dark patterns. Those patterns that should be prevented when it comes to developing AI applications, because they may lead to decision making that are suboptimal or undermined and could result into very high inherent risks. And in connection with the risk assessment that the draft of the European Commission includes on artificial intelligence, and I would like to, it's good to perform a good risk assessment of the AI systems. What the Social Dilemma movie reveals is that it conveys the message that many of people that have been involved in AI development for social media were incapable to analyze the long-term impact of what they were doing, actually. So the risk assessment, in my opinion, works in a limited way. So we should find a way to include that knowledge of what shouldn't be done when it comes to risk assessment, so we could have a better idea of what the impact that we're having, not only individually, because when developing a recommendation system for news in Facebook, I mean, that developer never thought that this would result into a filter bubble or in a disinformation process massively. So we should perform a risk assessment individually and collectively. And that is darn hard, because to take into consideration the social part, the social aspect, I believe that that is key to have an AI development that it should be more ethical and trustworthy. And sometimes it is incredible to do this. In the case of Compass, we mentioned, but you know, the algorithm is a deterministic code that is related to variables and some weights. But if we take the Office of Qualification in England, in August last year, in order to avoid the admission tests at the universities, they estimated the results They estimated the results and they included in the variables the geographic location of schools. This is a mistake that cannot be overlooked. You should perform one simple risk assessment, and probably they're not considered on a daily basis the developers did not consider, and it was overlooked by those that they were speaking of this sort of information. These red lines that in the European Union proposal is not that clear. For example, data protection is not included here. We don't have red lines. There are no data categories, special data categories. There's not a prohibition of personal data. Obviously, the special categories are imposed some requirements that are not recommended or they're more difficult. But there's not express prohibition subject to this regulation. For artificial intelligence, there is a prohibition, but it's not sectorial. It doesn't say that you cannot do it for education, for health, for transport, or for national security. It's for a specific purpose. Do you believe that these red lines are necessary? And second, if so, can we think of other treatment or other sectorial treatment that at first they are prohibited by the state or by the city of New York in this case? I believe Jorge would like to say something of what I mentioned before. Some brief comments, and if you want to, I can approach the question since it's related to regulation. Documented is fine.
Pero no basta, o sea, los registros son importantes, es un buen principio, pero lo que tiene que ser es explicable.
What we can do, this should be explained, it should be a clear case. Probably the ownership of these rights, should exercise the rights, okay? So this is a comment that I would like to make. I'd like to say that we are based on personal data protection, and the ultimate end is to serve humanity, because this is neutral technology. It's a medium to reach an end. If we cannot comply with the common good, purpose, or welfare, we'll be in the wrong path. And here we see that there are two to blame that created this romantic internet, monetizing data and gathering data not in a transparent way. So this is important. One last comment on regulation. Regulation, we need to understand technology for regulation. There are interesting regulatory frameworks like sandboxes. Sandboxes are used for blockchain in the United Kingdom. Is to understand clearly how it works and to try regulation and its effects. We need to intervene gradually, especially over a phenomenon that is unknown to us. Who can explain that the algorithm was the one that won the chess tournament? There are applications that we don't have yet. What scares me is that we may regulate a phenomenon that is unknown to us in the wrong way. I want to give an example. Out of the hearing of Mark Zuckerman in Congress in the United States is not what he replied, but the questions asked by lawmakers. So we need to understand better, we need to approach technology, and we need to work hand in hand. So there's no better way to address governance that implies stakeholders and citizens in a positive way. Probably they cannot understand the scope or the reach, and that is important. If you don't have the red tape in Brussels to reconstruing what citizens demand, that is not what is coming out of regulation. So this is something that is a pending issue. And Claudio, what was the question? Yes. If you believe, well, in the proposal of AI, there are red lines. Yes, that you don't have in personal data protection, okay, at first. So, are they necessary? They're not necessary? Do we require more? I believe it's a good start. The issue of social scoring, and this is widely disseminated in China, that's why I am suspicious of everything that China does in connection with regulation. It's a surveillance tool, and algorithms is one more tool in a totalitarian government that wants or intends to have technology supremacy. So we need to start with the red lines. So the regulatory framework is okay, or project is okay, like social scoring. Why governments only? Why not to prohibit what the main platforms are doing? So probably that is the case, and a lot needs to be done. But at least that's an agreement in principle of what shouldn't be done. Like, for example, biometrics identification, public spaces, surveillance. It needs to be a good policy to prohibit, at least until we have a better understanding of it. Or, for example, the interest groups, clusters. The way we see each other and to be classified in categories that we're not used to it. What happens with sexual orientation? Should it be allowed a company or a governmental agency to have a cluster in connection with sexual orientation? That should be another thing that should be prohibited.
We have another question, Alelí. If we don't program the future is going to program us. In that sense, you were talking about difficulties, and you were saying that some countries are waiting to see what happens. And what do you think are going to be the main difficulties in order to bring awareness locally for the authorities? Not only the population, but also the authorities specifically. The population is feeling the effects of automation in their daily lives, but for public authorities that should be regulating or helping in the governance of these things, which do you think are the main difficulties at the local level? Claudio, I think that Alelí is not connected. She's offline. I'm sorry, I was offline for a second. I'm sorry, Claudio, can you repeat the question? The question was, you were sharing with us the global initiatives as regards regulating and governance, and you were saying that some countries were waiting to see what happens. But the question is, which are the difficulties that you see to bring awareness as regards local authorities, not so much the general public, because they do feel the effects of automation in their daily lives, but in the case of public authorities that should help regulate or govern these kind of automation aspects, which do you think are the main difficulties at the local level for bringing awareness in the automation role in your country? Actually, in Honduras, these are topics that are not well developed yet. We are working toward that, but the difficulties that we have is lack of interest on the authorities to to follow on that kind of technologies. The situation here is that many things are involved in politics, so it depends on politics and not on the need that we may have. So there are many proposals as regards technology in our country in the political sector that is eventually the sector that is going to be bringing about that change. It's difficult to have a change from the bottom up. It's easier from the top to the bottom. So I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but we need people with open minds and willing to really help with this kind of activities, because it's only done at the ground levels. There's a lot of talk about AI and automation, but it's only talking about it. So this is like being too difficult to have access to this, even if we have good intentions and a good project. So from my point of view, I work in an innovation development center, and in my center, we work with emerging technologies. So we are developing projects. I do have an AI project that suggests supporting education in general. We are going to launch it soon because we think that it's the only way in which we can achieve something, some results. Thank you, Alelí. We have only 5 minutes before we wrap up the panel. I want to thank you once again for being here today with us, for sharing your knowledge with our fellows, and we have 1 minute for each of you to wrap up the panel. Nico, thank you so much. Once again, good luck with your new challenge. Thank you, Claudio. Thank you, Olga, Adrián, as always, for inviting me. And what I try to do is to talk about AI as something that will allow us to develop many positive aspects, and that, of course, it should be regulated in a good manner, but we also need to cooperate in order to create the adequate regulations and to spread legal knowledge to the developers so they can include the necessary ethical principles so as to reach the goal that we all want, that is AI for good. Thank you once again. Yes, it's a huge collaboration challenge. Jorge, it was a pleasure. I don't know if this is the 3rd or 4th conference that we share. It's always a pleasure. Claudio, welcome to Madrid whenever you want to come. Final comment. Here I agree with Nicolas. AI can do great things for humanity. Let's think in the health sector, it's fantastic. Data protection is important. There are other rights that we need to protect, but we need to understand in a dynamic way where this technology is going to go. And we need to identify the red lines that you were mentioning and to move forward, because actually the owner of the rights is the common citizen that needs to understand how this is going to affect their rights. Supremacy of the human being is a very important principle, but we need to be clever about it. So we need to work a little bit on the myth and realities and to give a different kind of dynamics to these regulations, because there are certain risks that we still don't know about.
Christine, once again, thank you very much. A very concrete, a very hands-on presentation. The fellows are already asking to see the presentation again, asking if they can have access to it. So it certainly triggered a lot of interest to them. And in a world where we have been talking about principles for a long time, and Olga is all about that, all about action. I know how she liked this presentation also. you brought us a very interesting insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And please feel free to share the link. It's available to everyone. Love for you to visit the Partnership on AI on the internet. It's partnershiponai.org. Lots of great actionable resources out there. And we'd love to hear your voice and how we can improve those in the way that you are approaching your work. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Alelí, mi compañera, estamos ahí
Alelí,
en el ritmo de organización del IGF Honduras. Nos vemos de nuevo.
we are organizing the next event in Honduras, and we are going to see each other. Thank you so much for participating in this panel. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel and to offer my ideas and my feelings. And my reflection had to do with we need to educate on AI. Thank you all so much. Olga, Adrián, thank you so much for inviting us, for in these 2 years that we couldn't get together face to face, at least we could do it virtually.
In the IGF in Berlin, I moderated a session about ethic and internet and artificial intelligence, and I got to know your organization. Please go to your website, and they have fantastic information, very good articles, and a lot of information. Les decía que la conocí.
I was saying that I get to know another colleague of Partnership on AI in IGF in Berlin in 2019, that I moderated a panel on AI and ethics, and I discovered the website of Partnership on AI that is great. Go there and look for detailed information. Thank you so much, Alelí. I was invited to the IGF in Honduras. I'm going to be part of it. Jorge, Nico, thank you so much. Thank you, Jorge. You were the first person that believed in this project a lot of years ago and helped us to have the financing at the time when you were working in Microsoft. And Nico, as always, great pleasure. Good luck in your new challenge in Hamburg. I hope to visit you soon. And Claudio, thank you so much for your help and support for this project. I wish you have a great day. And I hope to meet you soon in person. Adrián is saying that we need to organize the school in Paraíba. I'm going to be the first attendee. Yes, we're going to do it soon. The hacks from Buenos Aires. I hope that you are safe and healthy. And thank you so much. Thank you. Well, this is the end of the fourth day. Friday is going to be a little bit of a short day. We are going to start at 9 a.m. Colombian time, 11 a.m. Argentina time, and 9 a.m. Ecuador, Peru, and 11 a.m. Brazil's time. Have a nice end of the day. Thank you for your questions, and I'll see you all tomorrow.